Welcome everyone to Deep Drinks Podcast, the deepest podcast on the internet. Today my guest is a very interesting one. Jonathan M.S. Pearce is a philosopher, a journalist, an author, reigning from South Hampshire, UK. Jonathan has a strong academic background, but most importantly for this conversation is his master's in philosophy from the prestigious University of Wales. Today we'll be looking at the religious ramifications of finding ETI, extraterrestrial intelligence, the subject of his book, Aliens and Religion, Where the Two Worlds Collide, along with the God question in general. Jonathan is also the author of 30 Arguments Against the Existence of God, Why I Am an Atheist and Not a Theist, The Resurrection, A Critical Examination of the Easter Story, Not Seeing God, Atheism in the 21st Century, along with many, many more. Jonathan advocates that casual philosophy should meet over pints of good ale. So so he fits in very well here. So we are very excited to welcome Jonathan Pearce. Let's do this. Hey, welcome to Deep Drinks Podcast.
I most like the fact that you called the University of Wales prestigious. I mean, that's a first. But no, thanks, mate. I really appreciate it.
I use your terminology. I swear I saw that was either on one of your bios online somewhere, and I was like, I don't know. I guess it's prestigious. I guess so.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll take that. No, thank you for this. And it's a shame it won't be the deepest of drinks. I know you've got other commitments, so you'll be joining me for shallow drinks. I'll be the deep drinker if you want.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we can still have a deep conversation. I can't get. I do have work after this, so I can't get I can't finish the bottle. Is what I would say. But if this conversation goes well, we can have you on another time, and that'd be super awesome to do. Because you've got a lot to talk about. But before we I've been blown away by your work. So let me just first ask, what are we drinking today, Jonathan?
Well, what I said to you, let's go for our most local wine. I've got a red wine it's a Pinot Noir, and that's always difficult to get right? So, and it's an English wine, so highly controversial. But apparently this is all right. This is from Titchfield, which is really local to me. Like this is super local. And in the absence of that going down well, I also have two beers from Gosport, which is just down the road. And if you can indulge me a second, this is from the Powder. This is from the Fallen Acorn Brewery. It used to be the Oakleaf Brewery, and then it shut down. So then had a Fallen Acorn, so it's grown back. And the logo for that was, I think, helped designed by Stephen Woodford, whose Rationality Rules. So he lives quite locally to me. So he helped design that. Anyway, so that's a Red Cat Brewing, and that's because you live in West Island, don't you?
I live in Australia.
Yeah, West Island. So this is this is a New Zealand beer where you got North Island, South Island, and you got Australia, which is West Island. It's just part of the far superior. I've never heard that. Yeah, it's just part of the far superior New Zealand, right? You got North Island, South Island, and West Island. So this is a New Zealand beer, it's a British beer from just down the road, but it's doing a New Zealand red beer, and this is the Warrior Double IPA. So HMS Warrior is in Portsmouth, which is really local to me, and this is brewed at the Powder Monkey, which in Gosport, where during previous wars, hundreds of years ago, Victorian era, that's where they used to keep the powder for the warships in Gosport, because they didn't want to. Here's a little thing, and I know I've done a lot of talking. They didn't mind Gosport blowing up, so they kept all the gunpowder in Gosport. It's like, that's a bit rubbish. And then Portsmouth is like, no, we won't keep the gunpowder there, and when we want to put it on the ships, we'll just ship it over from Gosport. But there you go. Anyway,
that's awesome. So well, thank you very much, and I do appreciate the ribbing on the New Zealand Australia question. I am shocked that anyone would take your position. Funny enough, we were going to move to New Zealand at one stage. It broke my heart, but I was going to go work for the only Christian game studio in the world, which was cool. They had this grant. Sorry,
is that a thing?
Yeah. There used to be some Christian games. They used to rip off, not this studio, but they used to rip off. It's called Wisdom Tree. They used to rip off all these classic like Zelda and all the NES games.
Right.
And then with and then this new game studio, what they did is they had a grant that was like worth millions and millions of dollars. It wasn't a grant from the government. It was like a bunch of rich people. They got together and they were like, before New Zealand had when they had a lot of rural towns, they would send out these like kids programs to kids in these rural areas, like teaching about Noah's Ark and stuff. And it was a ministry. But then when the internet came around, I was like, well, we don't need this anymore. But they started millions of dollars. So like, what do we do? And then someone floated the idea, why don't you guys create a video game? And the video game was actually pretty interesting. It was like an RPG, like Final Fantasy or something, but it was retelling the story of the Bible, but through like allegory. So like, there was Sodom and Gomorrah, but it was like in the game, it was like this factory spewing smog everywhere and all this stuff, and it was like online multiplayer. But as soon as it came out,
it died. C.S. Lewis in computer games.
Yeah, pretty much. And it was and it died as soon as it came out. So I'm lucky we didn't go over there. But I'm still friends with the producer who I hassled for a long time to try and get on the team. But yeah, we were packing up our stuff to go over there, and I just didn't get the job at the last minute. So
it's a lovely country. I love New Zealand. Big fan. I love Australia as well. I backpacked around Australia in 1996. So I went from Sydney down to Melbourne to Adelaide, Alice Springs, Perth, Darwin, and then skedaddled. So
yeah. What I love about that is like New Zealand and Australia have a very good, well, not so much Australia anymore, but they have a good hitchhiking culture.
Yeah.
In New Zealand, it's like it's very safe. Like everyone, it's like a part of the community to hitchhike. In Australia, not so much. We had the backpack murders like back a long time ago. But my dad used to hitchhike from Melbourne all the way up to Early Beach, so like right from the bottom all the way up to the top with his dog. And his dog got so used to the trip, like he used to be sleeping in drain pipes, like he was just roughing it, like real, like not homeless, but like just loved the wildness of the road. And his dog got so used to the trip that when from Melbourne to Early Beach, which is like the size of the country almost, the dog jumped in someone's ute going back the other way. And my dad's looking around for the dog, and he just sees the two ears at the back of someone's ute. And he's like, "Get out of there! Get out of the car!" And the dog was sick of it. He's like, "No, I'm going home." So yeah,
brilliant. Well, can I just say, for an English wine, this is, and for Pinot Noir as well, this is all right. Okay. The wine shop, they're like, yeah, it's all right. It's not bad, especially for the money for a Pinot and an English wine. Normally, if you got to get a half decent English wine, you got to pay 30-40 pounds. I wasn't going to do that, but this is all right. I'll take that.
Well, I've got the a Barossa Valley Shiraz from 2016. Barossa Valley is our most probably one of the most popular wine regions. It's down further south. It's not super local to us. It's like the other side of the country, but it's down near Victoria. But it's like Adelaide area. But it's yeah, I'll try it.
So it's not your most local wine. That's not good enough.
No, I'm sorry.
You've failed me. God, that was.
What do you mean? What do you mean?
Right,
I didn't know.
Next time, it's going to be your most local wine.
Did you want to do the most local wine? I thought you were just saying let's do a local wine. Oh
no, most local.
Okay, all right. Well, you know what? I have stuffed you up because, and I can't even drink a lot of it either. So let's have you on another time where we can, where I can really make it up to you. I apologize, but oh, damn! I wish I kind of read that properly. I've been super busy, but anyway, sorry. So you've written a lot. So you've written the 30 arguments for the existence against the existence of God, which I think is a fantastic book. And you've also written the book that I had Aaron on. You co-authored it with Aaron, Dr. Aaron Adair. Yeah, that one.
Yeah, Aliens and Religion, where two worlds collide, and then 30 arguments against the existence of God, heaven, hell, Satan, and divine design. And there is a little bit crossover there actually with some of the kind of design when you're talking about aliens and the universe.
Yeah, it's and I really appreciated how easy it was to read the 30 Arguments book, because you sent that to me just as like a bonus, and I started reading that and I was like, this is just very easy to read for a layman. So, but I wanted
that was the intention as well. Like, it really, I was like, I want these arguments to pack a punch, and I think they really do pack a punch. I think I don't think any of the arguments have answers. Otherwise, I wouldn't have put them in the book. If they were easily answered, there would be pointless like writing about them. I think those pack a punch, and it's nice to be able to give some of that deep hitting philosophy and package that up for the layman, for the intelligent layman. Yeah.
It makes me wonder why. Like, it makes me, because the arguments are really good. I'm sure that there are apologists of some sort who can find their way around it, and that's the point, right? Is you can find your way around anything if you try hard enough. It's just whether or not that's the most reasonable solution.
That is a really important point. Well, no, what you said is super, super important. And in fact, it's important for, we talk about it in the Aliens and Religion book, because what you find, and you'll find this a lot in apologetics, is the move. Richard Carrier coined it as possibilita ergo probabilita, which is it's possible, therefore it's probable. And it's a really, really common Christian apologetic. So you say, or theistic apologetic, where they'll say, okay, here's a problem. Conceptually, this could be an answer to it. Like, it's conceptually possible. And then you go, right, it's conceptually possible, therefore it's probable. And then they go, and therefore that's the answer. Therefore it's it. And they jump from, they invalidly, I would say, or unsoundly jump from possibility to that's what happened. All like that. And you find this with even talking about biblical exegesis and historical analysis with regard to the nativity. So I've written a book on the nativity, where you have this issue where the census happened in the reign of Quirinius as a governor of Judea, and then you had Herod the Great living at the same time. So both these things happen in the story of the nativity, but actually Herod the Great died in 4 BCE and the census took place in 6 CE. So there's a 10 to 12 year gap between the two of these things being able to coexist. And I argued against Lydia McGrew on Unbelievable Radio Show, and she was coming up with all this. Well, she provided really confidently provided these possibilities. Well, it could be that this was the case, and then every single time it's a possibility ergo probability. But because she said it so confidently, people watching are like, oh yeah, she had him there. It's like, no, all she did was present things that possibly could have conceptually happened, and showed no case that was the most plausible explanation. Sorry, too much talking.
No, that's the perfect amount of talking. This is what we do. But exactly, you can take Noah's Ark, the most implausible thing in the Bible, in my opinion, one of the most implausible anyway. And you've got Noah's Ark, and you're like, okay, well, maybe it's random chance that all the fossils appeared to to be flooded and appeared to line up as if evolutionary phylogeny was true. It's possible that maybe all the dating we have for all the different cultures around the world is just wrong for different reasons. It's like you can possibly, all the evidence we have that there was no global flood, all the scientific evidence we have is just misguided, and actually the story that looks like it was borrowed from the Mesopotamians is actually true. You could say that, like that's good, like it's plausible, but it's not plausible at all. It's not by any means plausible.
A really nice analogy to this that almost sounds like frivolous is, well, unicorns could exist. And that's basically what the apologist is saying. It's like, well, this could be the reason. Yeah, unicorns could exist, but is that the most plausible explanation of the data we have? No, it's not. And so I won't just rely on a possibility on a conceptual possibility.
Well, it's funny too, because aren't there unicorns in the Bible? Like,
well,
technically.
Yeah, and there's the whole idea. Yeah, I don't know the exact nature of that, but there are claims that they're referring to unicorns.
Isaiah, I just looked up Isaiah 34:7, and the unicorns shall come down with them, and the bullocks with the bulls, and their land shall be soaked with blood, and their dust made fat with fatness. I'm sure there's a different translation for that word unicorns, but that's the King James translation.
Yeah.
King James translation calls it unicorns.
Going to be about the translation, so I would have to look into that. But I mean, goodness me. There are the Hebrew Bible is an interesting one, isn't it? And trying to take it literalistically. So many of these stories are so obviously like etiological. So they are explanations of geographical, you know, data or explanations of how things came to be or people or whatever. So you look at there's a salty rock, isn't there, somewhere near the Dead Sea, and that is, that hence the Lot's wife story popping up, and it's to explain a kind of pillar, a rock pillar. And once you understand that as an etiological story, then it starts making more sense. It's just, yeah, we'd expect to see stuff like that. And when we look at other cultures and understand their stories as myths or explanations of data in that kind of sense, then why would the Bible be any different?
Exactly. So I've linked both your books, one in the chat and one in the description. Everyone go check out the book, this Kindle and paperback, for 30 Arguments Against the Existence of God and Aliens and Religion, Where the Two Worlds Collide. They're fantastic. I'm gonna bug you guys to pay for a signed copy, because it's I've liked both these books a lot. I'm gonna have to check out your other work, because I'm a new fan. I really do like it.
Good stuff. Thanks.
So no problem. I've got a I've got a question. So before we move into aliens and before we move into God, so I think maybe we could start with God, then move into aliens in the second half. But before we even begin to ask the God question, I want to know your opinion as a philosopher. How do we even begin to ask a question about something like God? Like you said this with when you debated Jonathan McClatchy, that we have the same evidence. We have the same Bible. We have the same, unless Jonathan's advocating for some sort of personal revelation, we have the same evidence. Yet you both arrive at very different conclusions. So I'm wondering, is there a philosophical issue in one of your thinking? Are you not seeing something, or is Jonathan not seeing something, or am I not seeing something? Like, how do we begin to ask that question about God?
I would argue that it's not a philosophical issue; it's a psychological issue, and belief is psychological and sociological. So people, you go to so what believers don't do ever, right? They say, "Oh, I've got a rational belief," and blah blah blah. But it's post hoc rationalized, right? They enter the belief psychologically, and then they spend the rest of their lives scrabbling around for rational arguments to support their belief. But they don't assent to the belief on the basis of this, right? No one does this, unfortunately. Is to read every book on theology from every religion in the world, every encyclopedia of natural, Blackwell's Guide to Natural Theology. They don't read every single philosophical text and then go, right, now I've got all this requisite knowledge, I'm now in the best position to assent to a belief or a proposition or whatever, or worldview. No one does that. What they do is they end up being in a worldview because their parents believe and they were taken to church and this and that, or they had a crisis in their life and were looking for God, or whatever psychological need, function that religion provides for the believer. That's what takes hold of the believer. And then they go, right, now I'm in this, I better justify this when I'm in an argument with someone else. And then they go and look for the argument. So belief, unfortunately, I've given like public speeches to like universities where I've gone in and said, right, okay, I know that 50% of you from the Christian Union and 50% of you from the Atheist Society. Yeah, for the Christians in here, I am not going to convince you to disbelieve tonight. What I'm going to say, there'll be the backfire effect. I'm going to give you rational argument against your position, and you will entrench in your original position even more strongly on the basis of me challenging that, because this is psychological. So if I want to disabuse you of your belief system, I need to understand what's psychologically tethering you to that belief system in order to kind of cut that tether.
Well, that's it. Like this is a sneak peek into the next era of Deep Drinks. Is we're going on an anti-apologetics arc, because I've decided that apologetics is wildly more dishonest than I thought it was. And Kip Davis feels the same. Kip Davis is coming on. We're going to discuss it. But But
Nice
the,
try.
the thing is, like, no, I don't know anyone who's like exactly what you said. And this is what I've said before too, is like, no one's like, you know what? I looked at the arguments and I was convinced that God is real because of the Kalam or anything. No. Like, you either wanted to believe in God, like you had you either brought up a Christian, went through a crisis, something like that, and then you found the evidence compelling enough to then.
I mean, how do you come to be a believer when you were? What's your story?
Well, my story is I was born into a Christian household, but and went to church from a young age and things like that. But as a teenager, I kind of stepped away from God. But I got invited.
No,
to
you didn't. You were angry with your father, as they say. No, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, everyone come up with some reasons why I stepped away from my. I moved up with my dad, actually. So I moved up with my dad, and that's when I kind of like moved away from God, I would say. But eventually got invited to a youth group, a Pentecostal youth group with some, of which I ended up being a youth pastor by some girls. And I went along and I had this tremendously powerful, for lack of a better word, spiritual experience. Crying, felt changed, felt all the hatred left my heart, all that kind of stuff. I felt drunk for 2 days. Like it was an experience. And then I went to, I was so delirious from all this. I went to school on the Monday, and someone said, "Oh, someone told me you got saved on a youth group on Friday night." And I said, "No, I didn't." I was like, "What am I?" I'm thinking like, "No, I didn't. What are you talking about?" And then I realized I did. And then I was like, "You know what? Yeah, I did." And then I became Captain Christian at school. I was running Bible studies and all that stuff. But for me, it was a part of even when I was sitting there about to have my spiritual experience in this, or I say spiritual just for use of, I don't actually believe in the spirit realm, but as I was sitting there, I was arguing with God. So I believed in God. So I was sitting there saying like, I don't want to be, I don't want to deal with this now. I'll deal with this when I'm 40, when I'm 50. I don't want to, I still want to live my life, et cetera, et cetera. So I was arguing with God in this area. So yeah, it became it was I remember actually what actually happened is I put my head down and like covered my face, and because I just tried to pretend I wasn't there. I was sitting at the back of the youth hall, everyone was at the front praying, and all these teenagers came over and started praying for me, and prophesying over me, and that step in faith.
Think of how many psychological things are going on there. How much validation of you're going through, and like it's all about you. I'm not belittling it. I'm explaining in some sense what would have been going on for you, and just together with all of that, and maybe all the issues or worries you'd had in the world, and
Well, yeah. So I've thought about this a lot. So one, I was a very depressed kid, like very angry, kind of kid. I also was already arguing with God. I felt like I lost my way a little bit, because I was into church before I went to move up with my dad, and and I was arguing with God. And then there was the step of faith that all these teenagers my own age were like praying and prophesying for me and telling me, I know you feel XYZ, but God wants you to know ABC. And it was like stuff I needed to hear. And then I'm looking down at a puddle of tears like this. But then what's even more crazy is I psychoanalyzed this for a while, is the youth pastor that I like immediately. So like only a couple of weeks later, I went to a youth group and the youth pastor was like, me and him connected really well, but he was an awesome guy. And I think I found a father figure in that youth pastor, because my dad has this this perspective that like the axe was always falling. So when I would come to dad and be like, Dad, I did something really awesome, he would always be like, that's great. He's like, but just watch out for this. Like, because he's always like, I think, he felt like life's kicked him around a lot, and it had that he was always trying to protect me. But that came away as like negativity. But this new guy, this new father figure in my life was like, you're awesome, you're amazing. And there's a funny story where everyone at the hangout at school was telling me that God was gay, but they were picking on me, right? and like making like really inappropriate jokes and stuff. So I decided to play into the jokes. It was just how I dealt with things. So I said, no, God isn't gay. And I said, because in the Bible, it says that gays aren't going into heaven and God's in heaven. So I get up on a chair and I'm reading from 1 Corinthians where it says, I tell you the truth, sexually immoral, idolaters, homosexuals will not enter the kingdom of heaven. And as I'm doing that, the girls that invited me to the youth group only weeks prior had come down to the hangout to see how I was going. And they just see from a distance me with a Bible in my hand preaching to everyone who's kind of like laughing at me. And they turn around and walk away like shocked because it was a bit of a spectacle. I'm doing it as a joke, but they tell the youth pastor in church says, young Dave McDonald with a Bible in his hand preaching to the youth of his school. And I'm like, oh no, like this rumor starting that I was like on this campaign to save the students. And I went up afterwards and I told him like, oh, it was kind of a joke, but it was like, and he's like, oh, okay. But yeah, it's funny how that already started to develop. But even then it was encouragement and so I've psychoanalyzed myself a lot with this. So
Matt, you're tumbling down that road like a snowball, just gathering momentum.
We have a super chat. I just want to read it out. So, and thank you. We got a new member, Off the Chain Atheist. Thank you for becoming a YouTube member. Every little bit helps. I appreciate it. Aaron Adair, amazing co-host.
Don't let him on. Oh no, dude, he's super chatted. What a ledge.
Thank you for the super chat. I really appreciate it. Isn't it possible that an alien named Quirinius,
so he was the guy in charge of the census.
Oh, okay. Came to Earth to have a census during time of Herod and Jesus, and and the ship was the Star of Bethlehem. There, nativity story solved. Yeah, that's true.
So
100% true.
So Aaron has written a book called The Star of Bethlehem, A Skeptical View, which is the go-to book on, the analysis of the Star of Bethlehem. And there are, in fact, kind of ancient aliens or alien explanations for the Star of Bethlehem as to, how it could be that this thing goes through the air, through the sky in such a way. Of course, he debunks those kind of claims. But this is, of course, Aaron is onto something there, because it is possible that is the case, Aaron. Yes. And then as a good Christian, I'm sure you are jumping to, therefore it's what happened, or as a good ancient alienist that you are, because I know Aaron is a big fan of ancient aliens. He loves them. He thinks they're all true, and aliens built the pyramids.
Yeah, he told me that. Like after we got off stream, he's like, just so you know, like the aliens did build the pyramids. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, interesting. No,
brilliant. I love the fact that we both said that live, and like he's sitting at home going, no, I didn't. Yes, you did, Aaron. You believe it.
Aaron kicked my ass a little bit. Like just the amount of we're drinking shots of 50%. Yeah, it was wild. I was pretty buzzed after that. That's probably that was up there with how drunk I've gotten on deep drinks before. But so when you say it's psychological, so how does someone how do we if we were to begin to answer that question and remove as much bias, I guess, as possible, how could someone do that? If we were to ask the God question.
What do you mean? How can someone do what?
So with the God question, you mentioned that it's psychologically motivated. So people grow up in their faith or have a crisis of faith. How do you know that something isn't happening to you that is psychologically motivated? Maybe you hate your dad, and that's why you don't like God or something.
And it's a great question. Yeah, how can I special plead myself out of this issue? You're quite right. And I've actually done, I could point you towards, I've done a podcast for Only Sky, having a look at how I've ended up different from my parents. And so I was a Christian up until 17, but I was a real kind of nominal Christian. In fact, I didn't really particularly understand Christianity. And then you get onto interesting questions about what is Christianity, what is there a true Christianity, and what qualifies you as a Christian. So if I'm an atheist now and say I'm a Christian, does that qualify me as a Christian? Okay, where do you draw the line? It's you are a Christian, and no, you're not a Christian. And so it's all really interesting. When I was 17 and earlier, I didn't understand any of the theology, really. I didn't understand the Son of God. I thought Jesus was just, that wasn't the saying that we understand it now. In fact, most Christians now don't really understand what Son of God means. I mean, I know plenty of Christians who think Jesus is literally some kind of biological son of God rather than part of the Holy Trinity in the Godhead, which is a very different concept. Anyway, atonement, all of that stuff I didn't really understand. But I went to boarding school. My parents were we lived around the world. My dad was in the Navy. And so that allowed me to be different from my parents, or be able to flourish in a way that, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, does it? But if with me, the apple fell into a river and kind of went downstream, and then like lodged itself on a bank, and I was able to grow in a different field with different nutrients. And therefore, I've grown to be someone who is similar in some ways to my parents, but really quite different in what I believe and how I think. And possibly being able to thrive in, or grow up in a kind of boarding school where your peers are lots of people and you have lots of ideas flying around. I'm not sort of sent down one track, and it was a nominally religious school, as some of these places are. We had a chapel and stuff, and I had to go like a couple of times a week, but actually that's kind of counterproductive, I think. And then I don't know, and you start thinking about things like the problem of evil was the first one that came along. It's like, why is there so much evil? I can't really understand that in terms of an all-loving God existing, blah blah blah. You end up going down a different course to your parents and being a sort of different person. But still, at the end of the day, you are the product of your environment and your genes and your parenting, right? Still. And so it's still the same problem, no matter who you are and where you are and what you believe. You're still, because this comes down to kind of whether libertarian free will exists or not. You are just a product of all those variables, and I'm exactly that. So again, I can try and special believe myself as being different for someone like you, growing up and believing what you do. I like to think that I have rationally come to understand my worldview, but that you could just as easily argue that's a post hoc rationalization for me. I would just still argue it's hugely more rational just on any kind. I've got to the point now, I've been doing this for so long, where I just think, man, Omni God, like all loving, all knowing, all powerful God, is just, you just can't make sense of that.
Omni God is just, it's just ridiculous. Like, it's beyond belief. I just lost my train of thought, but but I had a really amazing question.
So you were almost touching on earlier, where do you start talking about God? And I in both books, in the Alien and Religion book and 30 Arguments Against God, I take aim, or we take aim with Aaron and myself, we take aim at the Omni God idea, which is the all loving, all knowing, all powerful God, because that's the most common iteration of God that people have. Some people people do sometimes criticize that. It's like, well, that's not my belief in God, or that's not like that. I can think of a God that doesn't fit that mold. It's like, yeah, fair enough. God belief is like the pea in a shell game, right? You kind of put it under the cup, move it around. It's like, and you go, right, that God doesn't exist, and you go, but it's not there, it's over there, and it's just like comes sleight of hand. It's just like, you've come up with a problem for God there, so I'm going to change my idea of God, and it's going to be this idea, and then you criticize that, and they say, no, it's not that idea, it's this, and their idea of God just shifts with every criticism. And so what we try and do is just, okay, let's pick the most common version of God, the one that kind of seems to be the basis of most modern understanding of God in modern religions, and that is what we call the Omni God.
Exactly. I think for me, the separation between, like, how is my worldview accurate and like Ken Ham's worldview not accurate? Like that's how, like, the question I ask myself often. Ken Ham, the young Earth creationist, right? And I heard someone say this once, and I thought it was brilliant. And that is, whichever offers the most novel. This gets into the science, but whichever offers the most novel, testable predictions, that's where we should focus our energy. Which I guess is presupposing some sort of like materialist
empiricism
perspective. Yeah, empiricism. But it's like, if like for example, like one of my favorite analogies is like Tiktaalik. It's like we have fossil here, we have fossil here. There must be something intermediate, like between fish thing and walking thing. And we know it's probably in this strata. We know it's probably, and that strata is actually on the surface of this location on Earth. They flew there. They in over a few years, they found that fossil. They dug it up, and it's like they predicted that prediction, like for evolution or the fossil record to be false, would be such a wild coincidence at that stage, like that, or the and Aaron talked about this on the podcast, is like the cosmic microwave background radiation, like the mathematical proof for that, and what we actually analyze is so pinpoint perfect. It's like, I mean, it could be a very bizarre coincidence, but like that coincidence would be is so novel that it's you have to work it into your belief system. So that
it's such an important point you're saying. Yeah. So they cobble together a belief system that has to answer all these kind of criticisms and all the data, and it's kind of ad hoc, and it's like, whereas you look at something like scientific naturalistic atheism, it's like, well, this is what we would predict, and this is all kind of like, yeah, it's all really coherent, rather than, we've come across that bit of data or that criticism, so we've got to move sideways and put something on here and do that, and it's really difficult. I think we use in the book, we talk a lot. In fact, both books that we've mentioned tonight, the 30 Arguments and Aliens and Religion, we talk about abductive argument. This is kind of what you're saying as well. So abductive arguments. What's a deductive argument? So that's something like, all men are mortals. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. Okay, you agree with the premises. Conclusion necessarily follows. Okay, fine. Inductive argument: all swans that I've ever seen are white, therefore all swans are white. And you're like, yeah, that's pretty useful until a swan is black, and you go, oh, okay, maybe it doesn't. But actually, probabilistically, inductive reasoning is still really, really useful. But abductive argument is like, okay, we've got two hypotheses, for example, two competing hypotheses. When you look at any piece of data, which hypothesis does it better? Which hypothesis is better supported by that data? It's the inference to the best explanation. So you're like, okay, what better explains this bit of data? And you can then reverse it, which is kind of what you were talking about, which is, okay, rather than what hypothesis does the data better support, it's what data does each hypothesis better predict, right? So it's like with scientific naturalistic atheism and the understanding of evolution and this, that, you look at the fossil, fossil data that we have and the different strata, and you're like, well, this is what we predict. And, theology, the biblical worldview doesn't predict any of that. It doesn't really help you at all. And the data, it's or just the belief in God. It's not really predictive of what we see. If you're fine tuning a universe for life, then, and this is something we deal with quite a lot in here. Actually, this is a big argument we talk about, which is. Sorry, and I know I've done a lot of talking, but I'll just finish this point.
Talk away. This is. There's no. You can go on as longer rants as you want. This is.
Mate, I talk a lot. So when Christians have or theists have the fine-tuning argument, and they look at this universe and they say, right, all these variables, all these constants, physical constants, are just right. And this universe is what we've got, and life just about hangs on. And if the variable or constant was just a little bit this way or just a little bit that way, we wouldn't exist. And we're clinging on to life on this pale blue dot. And actually, when you look out there, there's hardly any life or no life anywhere else, and we're just here. Therefore, this universe was made just for us. Right. And you're like, okay, that's interesting. And then imagine a hypothetical, which is the universe is teeming with life. Right, so we've got black holes at the present. We've got black holes. It looks like the universe is fine-tuned for death, if you ask me. But the Christian will argue it's fine-tuned for life. And then the other end of the spectrum is, imagine a universe that's teeming with life. Everywhere you look, every moon has life on it. The variables are so expandable. It's so like you can move variables all over the shop and life would still exist, right? So then the Christian would say, well, look at this. There's life, or the theist, look at this, there's life everywhere. It's teeming. Therefore, this is evidence that God exists. And you're like, hang on. You've gone from the one end of the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum. And you said, this is evidence for God existing. And you said, this is evidence for God existing. In other words, no matter what the data is, that is evidence for God existing. You are having your cake and you're eating it. It's like tails you win, heads I lose. And that's a real issue there, I think, in this kind of understanding of, the data. And yeah. Anyway, I
fully agree. And this goes a little bit into, your book, 30 Arguments. So like you've written your 30 arguments against the existence of God. Which is the best one, do you think?
Oh, damn it! They're all brilliant, right? I love. I honestly couldn't answer that. I do like some of the simple ones, like, and we do mention this in here as well, because this is when we talk about aliens. You talk about okay, if there's intelligent alien life out there, and Aaron's talked to you about that, and the conclusion is, well, it depends how big the universe is, but if it's pretty damn big, there's going to be quite a lot of aliens out there, and if it's infinite, it's going to be an infinite amount of aliens. So yeah, there's a bunch out there. They're probably just too far to be able to. I say that's quarantined by distance, right? But they're going to be out there anyway. The question, the question we're trying to answer with that book is Omni God, for example, Christian Omni God, more or less likely given the existence of intelligent alien life out there? Okay, so you say, well, what is intelligent alien life? Are aliens going to be intelligent? Okay, if they're going to be intelligent, okay, are they going to be moral? Yeah, well, it'd be kind of weird if they're intelligent and not moral, and we are white. Why are we? Okay, so if they're going to be moral, are they going to be fallen? Okay, it'd be weird if they're moral and not fallen. That's really unfair that we're the ones that are chosen to be fallen and designed in a way that we're fall. But actually, there could be all these other existences of intelligent alien life that aren't fallen, that are just morally perfect. Like, what, that seems really unfair. So given that God's unlikely to be unfair, you'd assume that all intelligent alien life is out there, is moral, and it's fallen. Then the question is, will they need atonement? What kind of atonement? Will it be the incarnation of God? And you go through all these kind of stages. But in the kind of like, will they be fallen type thing? Will they all have an Adam and Eve story? Will our Adam and Eve story do it for all of them? Or, will they all need their own Adam and Eve story?
Did Jesus need to save, every, like, did Jesus need to die on every planet? Did Muhammad need to split everyone's moon? Like, at what stage did like the stories need to repeat on these other planets? Because it expands, right? So it's the same thing. Like, it's the same problem, but just as like, well, what about the uncontacted tribes in the Amazon? Like they never knew about Jesus. Like, do they need? And it's like that was a huge problem a while ago. Now it's like, now we're talking about aliens. It's like, it's the same problem. It's
Oh, there's so many different directions we can go off in it, and we spend a lot of time talking about whether there be one Jesus or a trillion Jesuses. And if there are a trillion Jesuses, then there'll be coexisting Jesuses in different places at the same time, and all these problems. And that's the kind of stuff we talk about. But going back to one of the arguments that I really like that I use in both books. Is the Adam and Eve argument. So even if you believe in the literal or the symbolic Adam and Eve, here's the issue. So it's a two-horn dilemma. So say you got Adam and Eve, and you believe that, right, Adam or Eve decided incorrectly, made a bad decision, and we're getting kind of punished as a result of what Adam and Eve chose, right? Let's take David McDonald, and we say, right, we're going to put you in instead of Adam. Now, if you are going to make the same decision that Adam made, and or Eve, right? And indeed, no matter who we put in those positions, they would make that same decision and eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil when they've been commanded not to, even though, like, the problem with that whole story is that they don't have the knowledge of good and evil yet. So you can't punish them for eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Like, that command has no moral value to them. Like, don't eat from that tree is morally neutral, because they don't have the understanding of morality, so they eat from that. They shouldn't be punished. But anyway, we'll forget that glaring hole in the story, and we'll say that, right, no matter who we put in those positions, they would make the same decision, which says that, well, God's a really crap designer, because actually, no matter who is in that position, they would make the wrong decision, which means they've been designed badly, which means God always wanted us to fail, because otherwise he foreknowingly created us, designed us, and created us such that we would all make that same mistake. Therefore, the whole fall is not on us, it's on the designer. But then the flip side of that is, okay, if we put David McDonald in the position of Adam, and David McDonald decided differently and didn't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, then that's an unrepresentative sample of humanity that God has chosen, and we are being punished on account of Adam choosing that, but actually another person might not have chosen that. So we got this two-horn dilemma, and this is one that I don't think I've ever seen a satisfactory answer for, which is either God is a crap designer, or God is desperately unfair in having us being represented by a non-representative sample.
Well, yeah. I mean, I used to make the argument about this to people about sin. I used to say, if I choose to get up and fly and parachute out of an airplane and live in the desert for the rest of my life and have children, my children are then therefore live in the desert. Like my choices impact my children and their children.
You've
is my camera?
Yeah, you've gone. You are now.
Oh, no.
God just said, "Hey, I never liked what you were saying," and now it's just going to cut you off.
Hang on a sec.
I'll tell you what. You can carry on looking for what the problem is. Oh, there you are. You're back. I was just about to go off on one then and give you another one of my arguments that's connected to that. I'll do that anyway.
What's going on? I don't.
Oh no, you're back. You're back.
Yeah, awesome. Oh, sorry. What's going on? Something's going on. Give us 2 seconds. I'll give you the floor.
Yeah. So I'll and another of my favorite arguments that I talk about in here is the idea that and one of the big problems of Omni God, this idea that God is all-knowing, all-loving, and all-powerful, is the divine foreknowledge. I think it's one of the biggest issues for belief in Omni God. The fact that the notion that God supposedly has the foreknowledge of all future, even freely willed events, is entirely problematic, and it just causes more problems than it kind of solves. And one of the issues is, and I'll argue by analogy. So imagine there's an amazing scientist. He's a phenomenal scientist. He's in his lab creating sentient creatures in test tubes or whatever. Now, in the design phase of creating these, before he creates them, he knows 100% that these sentient creatures will be created in the lab and will go out and cause merry havoc in the town around. That these sentient creatures will go out and rape and murder and steal and do all these horrible things. Some of them would do nice things, but most of them would do absolutely horrible things. And he knows that in advance of creating them, and then goes, yeah, I'm going to create them anyway. So he creates them. They go out into town and cause all this horrific moral abhorrence. And given that, you would expect the police to come knocking at his door and say, hang on, we just come to an understanding that you've knowingly designed and created these sentient life forms that have, even though they've freely gone out and done these things, if you believe in free will, which I would contest, but even if they've freely gone out and done these things, you knew they would do that, and you created them anyway. So you are ultimately responsible for what they've done. You knowingly set this state of affairs in motion. Therefore, we are going to arrest you for being complicit in what these things have done. In the same way that a CEO of a car company, who was also the designer of the cars, would be morally complicit in designing and creating cars that he knew would crash and cause issue for those driving, and yet designed and created them anyway, and then sent them out into the marketplace. They crashed and people died. And then, if you're going to take atonement seriously, then demands a payment for those cars crashing, right? Those cars have just gone out and crashed. They've caused all this horrific mayhem. Oh, and by the way, I want you to pay me for that. And that's the problem with divine.
Don't worry, I'll pay for it. Yeah, you better work.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, look, okay. Yeah, I come out of my pocket because I need to pay.
Exactly. I've had the same arguments with Christians before. It's how do you get Adam? So there's a few problems in this. I've had this conversation a long time. There's a few problems. One is like, if you believe that Adam and Eve, God created Adam and God was all knowing, and he created Adam and Eve, he knew ahead of time what choice they were going to choose. The Christian gets around this, or I would say Christian or Jew, but I guess Christian. I don't know how much Judaism believes in Adam and Eve, but you get the average Christian and they'll say, no, God said they had free choice, so therefore they did. But then in my opinion, that then means that God wasn't all knowing, because God could never be surprised. As soon as they eat the fruit, God wasn't like, whoa, oh my God, like, this is amazing. Like, whoa, like he knew what they were going to do.
Yeah, it depends how you define foreknowledge, but the divine foreknowledge as usually understood, is a foreknowledge of even freely willed future events. So Christians will try and get around to this, like, even though he knows what they're going to choose, it doesn't mean that they are determined to choose. I think there's a huge problem with this, and it gets into the long weeds of philosophy here, but I still think there's a massive problem with that. But even if you assume that he's not making them choose that way, he kind of is, because he's designing and creating them in the knowledge that they will choose that way. And he could choose he could choose other hypothetical worlds where that didn't happen, yet he chooses a world where that did happen, so that he's still ultimately responsible, even if you believe in free will, because he knows it. And Christians do know this is an issue, because they've developed more recently something called open theism, which is the position that God doesn't know freely willed decisions. But then it's like God is, I think, reduced to kind of throwing the dice, and then Facebook has more predictive power than God. Like, we can understand human behavior on the basis of 300 Facebook likes better than God, apparently, if he's just like, oh, I wonder what they're going to choose. Oh, it turns out that, yeah, that they're pretty good at genocide.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a typical example. Open theism to me is a typical example of looking at the evidence, like, or new thought, and going and like trying to fit the version of God into that. Like, maybe I used to say, maybe when God created the world, it was just the Big Bang, and that's like, I used to say stuff like that. Before I want to ask you about finding ETI, but I want to first ask you about what your take would be on this, which would have been my main argument for the existence of God, which was, what do you say? And you might have addressed this in your book. I haven't finished it yet, but what do you say about someone who believes that they have experienced God as real as the chair that we are both sitting in? So they say, I've experienced God tangibly, real, like it's more real to me than reality itself. What do you say to someone like that?
But my question would be, well, so say you've said that to me as a Christian, right? So just so we can role play this. So, okay, David, what would you say to a Muslim who says that, who has a mutually exclusive God to yours?
Yeah,
because
I mean, that's the classic. Yeah,
that's all I have to do is point out that you don't believe other people having those supposedly very real experiences, and this is, that's the issue with the existence of claims of personal experience of God, is the fact that all religions throughout history and time have had those, and they're mutually exclusive. So, it's plausible that they've got it wrong. If it's plausible, if we agree that it's plausible that guy's got, in fact, it's not plausible, it's almost definite that person's got it wrong, then you're special pleading your own experiences. And that's why someone like William Lane Craig, who talks about the inner witness of the Holy Spirit as being, fundamental, but he recognizes he can't use that to convince third parties. Like, he is at least, cognizant of that. It's good enough it's good enough to convince yourself. It's not good enough to convince others.
Why is my camera keeps doing this? I apologize, everyone. This has never happened before. I reckon something's overheating or something's going wrong.
It's more likely that God just hates you.
That's true. Well, as I actually wanted to, I'm gonna have to fix this again, but let me just ask a question as I'll solo you again. But
I'll go off on one.
Yeah, awesome. So you say something really interesting in the book. You say, you and Aaron say, we tend to agree that many theists who declare theism in general won't be challenged by the discovery of ETIs. So theism won't be challenged.
Yeah, and again, that goes back to the adaptability of theism, and that goes back to psychology. We talk a lot about cognitive dissonance reduction, just to explain for those. I mean, most people will know what this is. We talk about it so much these days. Cognitive dissonance is when you have a core belief and you have evidence against that belief, and it comes into contact with that belief, and there's a dissonance, there's a disharmony. And so the brain doesn't like disharmony, and something has to give, right? But usually it's not the core belief. So what happens is you either reject the evidence that's contrary to your core belief out of hand, or you attack the person the messenger that delivers that, all these psychological ways of minimizing that evidence, or you adapt your core belief to the evidence, and there's some kind of synthesis there, but essentially you are maintaining your core belief, so on and so forth. But what you very rarely do is accept the new evidence and get rid of your core belief. Sometimes that does happen. Eventually it does happen. So say for example, with yourself, David, some people get to a tipping point, and all the ducks are in a row and all the psychology is in place and things have happened such that you get to a point where you go, yeah, actually that's untenable now. That position is now untenable. But that's rare. Generally, and it's quite a big world shaker, isn't it, for individuals? But generally, people hold on, no matter what the context, they hold on to their core beliefs. Now, when you're talking about the discovery of intelligent alien life, however that is, even if it's aliens coming down, or more likely from a distance, techno signatures or whatever, it's far more likely that theists, even though we argue that such a discovery would make the existence of Omni God less probable, even though we are confident with the conclusions of the book. This is where psychology takes over, which is a core belief in God. Aliens come along. Okay, it's a bit of a problem, but we'll adapt them to our core belief. And so cognitive dissonance reduction will take over, and psychology will take over, and people will end up adapting their religious beliefs in the same way that they did when they discovered the heavens weren't as they were claimed to be in the Bible, as in cosmology. So if you look at biblical cosmology, I don't know if you talked about that with Aaron, and he's probably the better person to talk to about this, but the Bible gets it completely wrong on biblical cosmology. And so you've got centuries of people
change it.
Yeah,
you have to change people, what the Bible says.
Yeah. So then it becomes symbolic, but you're not giving up your core belief that the Bible is true. The Bible is just now, it's being symbolic there. It's like people weren't ready to understand the truth of biblical cosmology, and that's a load of nonsense. But if that allows them to maintain, I would say there are two things that for me should lead anyone to reject the Bible outright as a book, and not even have to go through writing bloody books on whether the resurrection happened, or books on whether nativity happened, all this kind of biblical exegesis and going through the fine print, right? You should be able to reject the Bible out of hand on two things. One, slavery. I talk about this, sorry for those people who've seen me say this before, but Moses should have walked up Mount Sinai or Horeb, depending on what part of the Bible you read, should have walked up that mountain, got the tablets, come back down, and God should have said, oh yeah, this is what God says, by the way, guys. Rule number one, slavery is bad, right? Rule number two, it's in capitals this time, guys, so he really means it. Slavery is proper bad. It's really bad. Don't do it. Just don't do it. Now, it doesn't matter whether people understood it or not. God's like giving you a diktat there. So don't do slavery. But the Bible gets slavery so wrong. It's a really very good book called Slavery, Abolitionism, and the Ethics of Biblical Scholarship by Hector Avalos. If you want to see how Christians have gone through time trying to justify how the Bible deals with slavery, read that book. It's disgusting. And I think, sorry.
We did a panel on slavery with 5 Bible scholars that all it was a big panel, and we went through everything.
Josh.
Yeah, we went through the exact verses. We talked about the New Testament. This to me was the death nail for slavery apologetics.
I've got to watch it.
But again, no one's changed there. A lot people still keep lying, and it is lying at this stage. We'll keep lying about slavery in the Bible and everything like that. What was your next thing? Sorry.
Well, yeah. So slavery is so wrong on slavery that really, so morally wrong. It's so obviously morally wrong. How can you believe that book is a moral guidebook? It's so wrong on that. I need not read the rest of it, or need not entertain it. Right. So that's wrong. And the other one, and we deal with this in our book here, Aaron deals with it more accurately, is biblical cosmology. And it gets what it claims the reality of cosmology is completely wrong. Like the firmament, like a solid like dome where the stars are like lights in the dome. They're not like planets or stars. They're not yeah, as in burning balls of gas. It gets it so wrong, and then people end up believing that incorrect stuff for so long that even someone like Giordano Bruno gets burnt at the stake for having a more accurate understanding of cosmology than the Bible does. And so therefore, if the Bible is sending you off down the wrong path, it's not really the book to be taken seriously that many Christians hope it is and think it is. It just, you know, those two subjects, and the thing about biblical cosmology is that either God is deceiving the reader or the Christian. So, you know, God obviously knows that that's not how the cosmology of the universe is. So, but this is his supposedly optimal revelation to his believers or her believers or its believers. And, you know, therefore, God is deceiving all the believers, all the readers of the Bible, which is kind of weird because that is lying, overtly lying, or I don't really know, or God's got it wrong, which is obviously not going to be the case. So, yeah, it's a real problem, I think, biblical cosmology.
I think that, you know, finding I would have strongly disagreed with you and Aaron about this point, you know, that if we found aliens, would it demolish you know, religions? But I now probably agree with you guys, because like you look at it and you're like, you know, you look at history, it's like, well, imagine what finding new cultures would have been like to the people, you know, like what do you mean God just came to us in the Middle East? Like there's a much bigger world out there. Discovering evolution, discovering Big Bang, discovering that we had other species of humans, like many other species of humans. So there's a thought experiment that I thought up that I wanted to run by you, and it's a thought experiment. Like, let's say, you know, the big thing is, you know, Christian apologists will say the resurrection definitely happened, and which is probably true, but not the resurrection, sorry, the crucifixion definitely happened, and the resurrection definitely happened. Crucifixion probably happened. The resurrection, it's a miracle claim, right? And you see it develop over time with, you know, Paul never mentioning it, then Mark, oh my gosh. Sorry,
that's fine. Just keep going.
I'm going to solo you while I talk. So you've got this, you know, you've got Paul, and then you've got Mark, and, you know, Mark's gospel doesn't have the disciples' encounter with the resurrected Jesus, doesn't have a birth narrative, and then as the gospels continue to develop, they get more and more complex with the story, and eventually Jesus is whizzing off into the clouds, and things like that. So the thought experiment I had is, you know, apologists will point to these things and say these are historically accurate. Well, let's say that we dig up this earliest gospel. Let's say it's like written a few years after the events that it was supposed to have written. It is the earliest gospel by far that we have. Let's say this gospel, and in this gospel, it actually says, you know what, we're going to take the body of Jesus down from the cross, put it in the tomb, and then we're going to take the body because we don't want people to destroy the body. And it says it blatantly in this gospel, and it says, we've actually hidden Jesus's body at this location. And then we go to that location, we dig it up, and we find there's a corpse in there, and there's a sign that says, this is the body of Jesus of Nazareth, blah, blah, blah. And it's all like verified by archaeology and carbon dating and textual criticism. Everything points to this direction. And it's like, we have the best case, like the best historical case, that Jesus existed, died, and was buried, and his body was moved. Let's say we can say that we found Jesus's body more accurately than we can say that anything else happened in the New Testament. What do you think would happen to Christianity? Do you think Christianity would continue, or do you think that would be it? Or do you think they would find a way to rationalize?
It would be a massive challenge, but I think there would be some kind of theological adaptation that would take place, because people have too much invested in their beliefs. I mean, you would probably see a lot of people drop off, but I think so here's the thing. In the Resurrection, a critical examination of the Easter story, I'll send you this book, David, and I have a feeling you might really like this, and I'm sorry to just spam that here,
no,
what I talk about in this book is I do a section on motivated reasoning. And I talk about William Lane Craig and say, well, here's someone who's written on the resurrection a lot. One of his books recently was on the resurrection. It's super important. Without the resurrection, like, the belief falls apart. But if you can show the resurrection to be untenable as a historical claim, then this will cause huge problems. But the issue is, for someone like William Lane Craig, is when they're doing their own thinking or defending against these kind of criticisms, they have huge amounts of motivated reasoning. You could argue I have motivated reasoning, but I don't have a business empire like based on this being right or wrong. Whereas Christians have not only their worldview, their beliefs, their whole like community, their church, their family ties, but someone like William Lane Craig's got an entire business empire. Some people have whole churches under them that are dependent on them, continuing to believe the whole worldview or the Christian story or the truth of the Bible, so on and so forth. So I think if you were to come up with something like that, David, as a thought experiment, I think that's going to be one of the biggest like dents in believers, in numbers of believers, because that is a real challenge. But you would still get people that are so invested, and I'd say financially invested, psychologically invested, sociologically invested in Christianity, that the cost of giving that up, even in the face of overwhelming evidence, is just too much. And so somehow they'll be able to adapt the scriptures or their theology to fit that data.
Well, you see that even now,
dismiss the data. Sorry.
With Jordan Peterson has very much whitewashed, not whitewashed, not the right word, sorry, but like he's very much he's made Christianity palatable. So he's made it like, well, it's you ask him, do you believe in God? And he says, it'll take me 3 days to answer that question. And you ask him, what is the Bible? And he goes, well, let's get down to brass tacks about what the Bible actually says. And he views it all like from a Jungian like psychological perspective, that it's all just like stories about the psychos. And people buy into it, and they go to church and they're like, yep, Jordan Peterson's right.
So Jordan Peterson is a businessman, and he knows his flock, and he knows that if he ditches that belief system, if he ditches Christianity, then he loses a massive portion of his audience. In the same way that William Lane Craig, for years, did not allow criticism of the Old Testament, of the Hebrew Bible, to find purchase. He would deflect. He would often hold up in debate. If someone asked him about the Old Testament, he would hold up a book by Paul Copan, Is God a Moral Monster? And he'd say, go and read this, and blah, 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 blah. But he wouldn't answer it. Now, funnily enough, now William Lane Craig has admitted that Adam and Eve are symbolic, and this has caused an absolute outrage with a whole massive tranche of his supporters, because he's getting to, he's getting a bit old now. He's not really so bothered. He's got a massive business empire. It's sorted. He's done for. He's not so worried about losing that part of that flock. And so I think these people like Jordan Peterson or William Lane Craig are people who understand how they answer these questions is dictated by their business model. Honestly, I really think that is the case.
Yeah, 100%. I've said this to Michael Jones. Is like, do you think he has inspiring philosophy and it's all apologetics? And I was like, but do you think you can even, like, psychologically, you put so much into this channel and so much into this worldview. Do you think that it hinders your ability to investigate?
Who's Michael Jones? Sorry,
inspiring philosophy. He's a
yeah. Christian
so guy. I've said this to him. I'm like, do you think it like it's a challenge to your belief system? That's primary. That's actually a big reason why I didn't want Deep Drinks to be like atheist drinks, or whatever, because I want to have conversations with people I disagree with, Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, whatever, whoever, because I don't want to. I want to always be available to investigate claims that I don't necessarily believe in, and that's kind of why I love Deep Drinks. But
commit to changing your position. Surely, I mean that's the point. It's like I could commit to being labelled an atheist, but actually, let's give myself some elbow room to be able to change that. If you provide me with decent enough.
If deep drinks, if I get convinced by some Buddhist and in 5 years I'm like wearing orange robes and got a shaved head, then that's what deep drinks will be. But it's like if it was like atheist drinks or like Buddha isn't real drinks or something, like then it would have confused branding, I should say. So that's part of it. It's like I looked at apologetics channels and I was like, I don't think they can honestly. I think it would get in the way. I think they could, psychologically, it'd be hard for them to investigate what's actually true because they've invested so much into their.
You are
work, their
100% correct, and I'm going to give you a real world and personal example of how this happens. Right, you probably know that I have 2 YouTube channels. One of them is a philosophy channel, A Tippling Philosopher, and the other one is ATP Geopolitics, which is a Ukraine war channel. And I am absolutely obsessed with the Ukraine war, and I do 3 videos a day. It's now my main kind of thing that I do. Right, I do 3 videos
Anastasia
a day.
on?
Yeah, and I've interviewed Anastasia. You've interviewed her as well. She's an absolutely fantastic guest. Yeah, now, here's amazing. The thing: like of my American audience, which a large proportion of my audience is American. You think of the people who are going to be interested in war. Now, I'm a lefty liberal. The people who are interested in war are generally going to be actually, it's quite a split, but there are a large contingent who are pretty right wing, Trump supporting people who also really feel strongly for Ukraine. So not all Republicans, they're split amongst, whether it's not everyone's a Marjorie Taylor Greene loving person who is like anti-Ukraine, pro-Russian, whatever. Anyway, I have this YouTube channel where normally I've written so many articles against, say, Donald Trump, right? And yet I know I have to be really careful when I'm talking about American politics, because if I'm really not so much honest, it's not that I'm dishonest, but if I go down a rabbit hole, which I'm prone to do, and absolutely go hammer and tongs at, say, Republican politics and anti-Donald Trump and all this kind of stuff, I will lose a shed load of my viewers. And because it's not a case of me being dishonest, but it's like a case of like, I don't need to do that here. And I've got this thing set up and I'm just careful. Or if I'm critical about Donald Trump, which I often am, I couch it in a particular way that I say, look, if you disagree with me, please, put your comments down in the threads really respectfully, and we'll have a and I'm just really careful with the language I use. And that's me, someone who thinks really a lot about everything. Okay, so then when you transfer this kind of idea across to someone who's involved in Christian apologetics to the point where it's their entire income stream, right? Then they just cannot, they simply cannot abide with like any kind of data or conclusion, any data contrary to their position or conclusion that is antithetical to their position. They just can't do it because their entire business model falls apart. And all of their family and friends and all that kind of stuff. So motivated reason is massively important. I have had a form of moderation of my own channel now, and not a way that I'm dishonest, like I've said, but it does moderate how I couch things. But take that, times that by 10, and that is how that's a challenge Christians have with dealing honestly with data that's contrary to their position.
Yeah, 100%. So what do you so you talk a little bit in your book about oh my gosh, sorry. About so I've got to work out what's going on here. But you talk a lot about other religions as well, and I haven't got to those chapters yet, but you talk about Hinduism, Islam, Judaism. Can you give us as we wrap up in the last 15 minutes here, can you give us a quick overview of like how would finding ETIs challenge those other belief systems?
Actually, to be honest, right, Aaron wrote those chapters, right? So he's expert
okay.
There. But it's basically, it's a problem for all other religions. However, there is is it Mormonism, which I think is slightly more likely to be more accepting of UFO, or sorry, not UFOs, of the existence of intelligent alien life forms. And so there is a little bit of a difference across the religions, but I think it is basically, a challenge to them all to different degrees. There's so much. I mean, we've not even gone into any depth of some of the arguments in this book, but you look at something like, I don't know, the problem of evil here. So the problem of evil is, why is there so much evil and suffering in the world, given an all-loving, all-knowing, all-powerful God? So a God that would want to do something about it, that knows what to do about it, and is powerful enough to do something about it. And you say, right, so David, imagine that you live in a world where stubbing your toe is the worst thing that can happen to you. It's the most amount of suffering you can have. And now if I was to ask you, and I know everything's relative, but if I was to ask you, how can you explain stubbing your toe in light of an all-loving God? You'd say, oh, it's a bit of a challenge, but it could happen for a greater good or whatever. Then imagine you live in the world that we live in presently, which is a world where there are tsunamis. 240,000 people died in 2004. We've got Ebola, COVID-19, genocide, all this. And I say, right, now explain that in light of an all-loving God. Would you agree that it would be more difficult to explain that second scenario than just stubbing your toe in light of an all-loving God?
Oh yeah.
So it would be. So I think that's intuitively the case, that it is more difficult to explain that amount of suffering in light of Omni God than that amount of suffering. Okay. Now, there's something that we talk about a lot in the book called the Copernican principle. The Copernican principle is that we think we're the apex of creation, but actually, if you are going to have like billions of life forms out there, intelligent alien life forms out there, probability would state on a bell curve that we're more likely to sit bang in the center. That means that there are going to be aliens out there that are far more intelligent than us, aliens out there that are far less intelligent than us. There are going to be far more moral than us, far more in the image of God than us. And that's a whole section in the book that's interesting, because actually, we argue we're in the image of God, or Christians argue that actually, if there are intelligent alien life forms out there, and we've got the Copernican principle, there are aliens out there that are more in the image of God to us than we are presently to fish. So when we look at fish and say, well, that's not made in the image of God, so we can dismiss fish as not being the apex or not being super important. Well, actually, other aliens can look at us and say, as if we are fish to them, and say, well, and yet here we are saying we're made anyway. So when you talk about the Copernican principle with the problem of evil, there is going to be suffering. We're going to be slap bang in the middle, more likely. The probability is that we are an average civilization for evil and suffering. So there are going to be civilizations out there that have more suffering than us, to the orders of magnitude, right? Instead of a genocide or a tsunami, there's going to be planets that have just been extinguished, or maybe even an entire galaxy destroyed, or whatever. So when I ask you, is it more difficult to explain an all-loving God in light of this earthly suffering compared to stubbing your toe? Now imagine the orders of magnitude of suffering that exists out there, that is this to this, and no, that hypothetical to this world, that galaxy or that existence out there is like that to us. And so therefore, you then say, well, given that there is that much extra suffering out there, surely it is that much more difficult to explain that in light of an all-loving God. Even more so, in other words, when the question of the book is say, for example, Christian Omni God more or less likely given the existence of intelligent alien life, the problem of evil alone would suggest that Omni God, for example, Christian Omni God, is less likely given the magnitude of alien suffering that exists out there, or almost certainly exists out there. So I didn't actually. What I did is I took your question about different religions and then answered with something I wanted to talk about.
The problem of evil. Well,
yeah,
that's it. The problem of evil. So it kind of makes it a whole lot worse. But what would you say to, I strongly disagree, but when I had Michael Jones on of Inspiring Philosophy, he said, he's got I think he's just finished his master's in philosophy, and he said that kind of, the problem of suffering kind of presupposes a form of ethics that is like a utilitarian perspective of ethics. But say that that what ethics really is like virtue ethics and things like that, and he says that suffering doesn't, if you take in the whole worldview of Christianity, suffering doesn't like, they're going to a better place essentially. So people who die in like a landslide, they're going to a better place. So therefore, and this time is like nothing, this suffering is nothing compared to the heaven. And he kind of believes, the C.S. Lewis take, that the gates of hell are locked from the inside, that it's like people are in hell are the only people who want the only people who want to be there, and so essentially heaven's filled with everyone. He said, like, Dan Barker, who's wrote the forward of your book, he said he'd be in hell because he said that when he meets God, he'll tell God to beg for his forgiveness and tell him to F off and then walk away, and it's like, well, he's like, so that would be someone, Michael says, well, that would be someone who would choose to go to hell because he choose to lock the doors from the inside. He said, but yeah, if you take in the whole worldview of Christianity and you look at morality as like virtue ethics, then then it's fine. It's okay that there's landslides and starving children and.
I mean, that sounds pretty consequentialist to me, or utilitarian, which is like the morality is based on the consequences of a given action. Well, if you're talking about, well, it's all going to be all right in heaven, that's almost like punting to a consequence, ultimate consequence. But there's an argument I often use, and in fact, it's in the 30 Arguments book, which is that heaven isn't justification, moral justification, it's compensation. So you've got to be really careful. And I talked about this with Joe Smith, and it does take a bit of refining. But if you are the sort of apologist that says it's any kind of evil is permitted, or any kind of suffering is permitted because it's all okay, it's going to be fine in heaven, there is an argument to be made that is not about moral justification. Heaven is compensation. So if I was to walk up to you, David, and punch you full in the face and break your jaw, that's morally abhorrent for no reason, right? It's morally abhorrent, right? Let's assume that we all agree on that, no matter what your ethical position is. But say that's morally horrible, right? And then I say, okay, mate, well, here's $10,000. Now, me compensating you for that, so I'm really sorry. It's like, what I've done has caused you this kind of problem. Here's $10,000. Now, that paying you $10,000, or if an insurance company did it, right, doesn't make what I originally did a good action. It doesn't turn the breaking your jaw into a good thing. The only way it can change that into a good thing is if you adopt strict moral consequentialism. Indeed, that's the only way it can become a good action, that I punch you in the face. If you go to a particular flavor of consequentialism that kind of talks to. So when you talk about heaven as morally justifying any kind of evil or suffering that goes on earth, that is basically saying it's all right, we're going to pay you $10,000 at the end. In other words, it's not. So if you talk, this is a really common thing, is like, oh, a baby's died of cancer, right, at the age of like 2 months. You say it's okay. The Christian says it's okay, they'll live for eternity in heaven. That is not a justification of that happening. That is a compensation for that happening. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So my argument there is that would be to Michael Jones would be that appears to be a compensation. And if you're saying it is a moral justification, you are indeed yourself using consequentialism. And the problem with using consequentialism is not a problem for secular people or non-religious people, but the problem for religious people is that you don't need a God for moral consequentialism to work as a moral value system. And that's why they don't like it. William Lane Craig calls it a terrible ethic.
Interesting.
So there you go.
Is there a type of see working?
Welcome back to reality.
So I'll see how long this lasts for. is there a type of morality that you could see working?
No. So I talk. You mentioned this book. This is my 3 books ago book. This is called Why I Am Atheist and Not a Theist. You see what I did there? That's a clever word.
Clever.
How to do knowledge, meaning, and morality in a godless world. And what I seek to do here is build up my worldview from the bottom up, which is looking at what are abstract objects, do the philosophy right at the basis of reality, and then work up through all these different stages, through theology, natural theology, epistemology, and then work towards morality and then whether God exists or not. So ontology, epistemology, natural theology, teleology, morality, and then atheism, right? But it's like putting all these bricks in place and then working up to the conclusion rather than starting with the conclusion and working back, which is what people do with the Bible. So this is true, and I'm going to work my way back. Well, no, let's sod that. What do we understand about reality, about ontology, about existence? And let's build up from there. And wherever this goes, that's what I'm going to believe. I'm going to build my belief system up rather than start with the conclusion and build backwards, because that just becomes a castle in the air. So, but with that, like when you look at like the Phil Papers study, the survey of philosophers, right, done in 2009, 2020, an analysis of what professional philosophers believe across the world, and you ask, what's your understanding of morality? Like after 3,000 years of moral philosophy, they still don't agree. So everyone's split like broadly 3 ways: deontology, consequentialism, and virtue ethics, and then other and whatever. But the point is that no moral value system is perfect. No moral value system works really, really well. Otherwise, we'd all believe it, right? All philosophers would believe it, but no one does. No one agrees. Still, no one agrees. In other words, my opinion is, and this would take about another hour to talk about, but my opinion is that morality doesn't exist out there, right? Not in the ether. It's not like, and even if it did exist out there, how would we know we've got it right? I talk about an epistemic barrier between us and, say, the moral laws. So say there are these moral laws in the ether, right? Well, how do you know you got it right? You don't. So there's no difference between that existing out there and not existing, right? You still have to construct it yourself. So in other words, morality is constructed in our own minds. And when we agree with each other and we do lots of philosophizing and we argue with each other, we have podcasts and we write books and we go down the pub and have a pint and say, you're wrong, no, you're wrong. And we argue about politics, which is morality. That's what we're doing. We're arguing about morality. We all have different ideas. And when we agree with each other, well, first of all, when everyone agrees, they write encyclopedias, or in terms of morality, when we agree on morality, what we do is we say, right, that's brilliant. You agree. Okay, let's start a political party, or let's vote for the party that most reflects our views, or let's embody this in a law, and then we'll vote for the party that best reflects that law, is going to enact that law, so on and so forth. But someone else can come along and change that law, so on and so forth. These rules and morality and laws, moral laws, don't exist out there. They exist in here. And our job is to try and agree on them and have a democratic political system whereby we can enact that across society for the benefit of us all. Or if you have incorrect morality, or not so cool morality as I do, then you'll try and enact rules that are not beneficial. So on and so forth. That's I'm trying to summarize like a book's worth of thinking.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to. We should have a conversation about morality, because I kind of take the position that this is going to make so many people cringe. I know this isn't the most philosophers who study morality disagree with me, but I'm kind of a moral anti-realist in some way.
I am.
Yeah, because it's like I feel like people just operate within their preferences, and like part of those preferences are like maybe the society you grew up in, maybe the traditions you were taught, things like that. But I just don't think there's like somewhere we can point to in the universe and say that is what morality is.
The only way you can do that, I've had a conversation, I had a podcast with Emerson Green, and he's a moral realist, but it's dependent on the ontology of logic. So if you think that logic exists as a fabric of the universe almost, then you can get to a kind of substrate maybe where you can get to a position where morality exists out there kind of more. But again, I still think there's that epistemic barrier between you and accessing that. So it's kind of irrelevant.
Yeah, 100%. Well, we're kind of almost at time here, but I want to quickly shout out the book is linked in the description as well as tagged in the chat. So if you want to check it out, definitely recommend it.
Please do, guys.
It's awesome as well as your other books as well. But it's great. It's great stuff. It's an enjoyable read. It's not too complicated, but it's not too basic either. It's a good book, and of course your other book as well.
Your podcast with Aaron Adair, my co-author, was absolutely fab as well. It really, really was a delight. So
yeah, that's a fun episode. That one, I felt like I was on the edge of my reasoning with that one because I was really challenged with the science. But Aaron did a really great job at explaining everything.
He's great.
Amazing.
He's a good man.
And of course, his book as well. Check out the Star of Bethlehem is a skeptical view, which is to shout out that book as well.
If you go back to 30 arguments, I just want to reference someone else in the live chat mentioned she, her when I think in reference to me talking about God and he. So in that book, right, and I talk about this in the intro or not the forward. I didn't write the forward. Dan Barker wrote the forward, and he's awesome. In the intro, I talked about how I use it to refer to God, right? Because actually God, I'm talking about God being this abstract omni God, all loving, all powerful, all knowing, this thing that exists out there rather than on this world as a corporeal entity. And therefore God doesn't have a gender, God doesn't have a sex. So therefore God is just an it. God is this abstract kind of mind-like thing. But actually, most of the attributes we would give to personhood, God wouldn't be able to have existing outside of time and all these kind of things. Anyway, I don't want to get into other arguments in the book, but
no, and that's something. Sorry, what were you saying?
I was just going to say I wrote the book trying to use the pronoun "it" for God.
Yeah.
When you always use "he" for God, and I tell you, it was bloody hard, and I think there's still a couple of he's in there, just like tucked away that I just couldn't find. You know, it's just so difficult to move away from saying he with reference to God instead of it, but it should be it. Anyway,
well,
sorry.
You've got Professor Francesca Statharakapoulou's book behind you, God and Anatomy, where God, historically was a male. Male physical body. But you said something that in your book, 30 Arguments, that I just thought was so poetically put. Time hasn't so much ravaged God's body as philosophically eliminated it. And I was like, damn, that one where that was almost, because I'm not sure if you saw, I put one of your quotes in the intro video.
I love that quote. Yeah, I was reading it. I didn't get to the end of it. I was like, God, sometimes, because I don't believe in the continuous eye, right? I'm a different person than I was 5 minutes ago, let alone 10 years ago. Sometimes I read back stuff I've written and it's like reading a different human being, right? You're like, well, and sometimes I read stuff and like, this is going to sound really conceited, right? But sometimes I read stuff and I go, fuck, that was good. And sometimes I read stuff where I go, holy crap, that was bad, and that's bad grammar. But sometimes you're like, yeah, I like that. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah. So this was the quote: "A perfect creator, as God must be, would surely choose to create perfectly. But we are here, good old humans on good old Earth, with its good old tsunamis and malaria, in this good old universe with its good old supposed heat death and good old life-sucking black holes. This universe is a perfect creation." And I just I like it.
I like that.
I don't do that all the time, but sometimes if I find a quote that just really speaks to me, I'll re-edit it in intro and stick it in there. And but yeah, so so much, thank you so much, Jonathan, for coming on. Well, I'll have to have you on again the next time, and I'll make sure that I can drink. I didn't think you you Brits could handle your liquor. So I just was like, oh, we're just gonna have a little bit, so.
Oh my, David,
we're the
David.
convicts, mate. We're the convicts
David.
down here that was sent down.
McDonald, right? This is fighting talk, my friend. This is fighting talk. So I'll rack them and stack them, ready for part 2, and
okay.
we'll go hard, man. We'll go hard.
Yeah, I think we should have
home.
a discussion on morality, or I should convince Michael Jones to come debate you on morality on deep drinks or something. It'd be interesting.
Do you know what is quite nice sometimes? It's just talking. Maybe have some questions just backed up, but almost like going around the houses and having these discussions that go like wherever they go and touching on many sort of subjects. I just like we've had tonight, which is we loosely talked about different areas of the books, but it's just nice having a wine and a chat.
Well, that's so it depends on what guest I have, but sometimes I know if I have Neil on, Gnostic Informant, or Derek, I just need to have a few dot points because they just talk and we just, it's natural. Some guests though, I'm like 15 minutes in and I'm already at like halfway through the notes. And I'm like, oh shit, what are we going to talk about? Like, because like we're just not flowing, we're just not connecting. But with you, I can tell it's an easy. So next time I'll make sure I'll bring a few things I want to talk about, and then we'll just kind of go wherever it.
Let's do it, mate. Let's do it. I mean,
awesome.
The sad state of affairs here, mate, is that I've got to finish this bottle of wine on my own now. I mean, my partner's gone. My partner's gone to bed. My partner's gone to bed. You're going to work. I'm just going to sit here twiddling my thumbs.
Well, I've got to go to work. So, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you in an upcoming episode and some more stuff that we're doing on Deep Drinks. And I'll see you guys later. Bye.
Yeah, thank you so much. We'd love it.
Bye.